Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much. May I just say how great a privilege it is for me as Ambassador to be here this evening for two reasons. The first is that this is the first event at this fantastic centre, Unad Alling Speisialta Cultúr na Héireann atá Bunahan seo in London August is Mahan Rudé Sin. It's great to have this fantastic building that will represent in the years and decades ahead the very best of Irish culture and Irish identity. I'm one of these people who strongly believes that the culture that grew up on our island, various influences acting on it, is one of our great treasures, one of our great national treasures. That and the landscape and of course the people of Ireland, those are the three things that make us what we are. And it's part of what makes Ireland, what gives Ireland a footprint in the world, is that we have this interesting, varied and dynamic culture expressed through literature, through song and dance and music, and through the stories of our people going back centuries and millennia. So it's great that we have in London a fitting location for the celebration and the cultivation of Irish culture here in London, and for the development of the Irish community, which has made a huge contribution to this country over decades and centuries, that it now has a place where it can come to develop its distinctive cultural legacy here in London among the Irish community and people who are Irish born and of Irish descent. The second reason I'm delighted to be here this evening is because I am privileged to be in the company of a man I called today on my Twitter account. Now that's a small thing, I know, but anyway, he's been called many things, many more important things in more important places. But I refer to him as a legend of the Northern Ireland peace process. And I mean that. And I'll tell you why. Because I first met Seamus Mallon in November of 1994. I had come back from Brussels at 4 days' notice, having been summoned back to take part in the Secretariat of the Forum for Peace and Reconciliation. And that was a momentous occasion, because it was an occasion where, for the first time, a dialogue involving different political traditions on the island of Ireland, because it included the Alliance Party, and it included some unionist voices who came down and, for example, the late Senator Gordon Wilson came down to express a unionist perspective on the issues that we were debating at the forum. But one of the leading members of that forum was Seamus Mallon. I remember very well meeting him in those first days of the forum, just shortly after the declaration of the ceasefires. And Seamus, at that stage, had been involved in Northern Ireland affairs for many years, for decades in fact. And I remember in the year I spent at the Forum for Peace and Reconciliation that Seamus was probably our most regular attender, never missed a session as far as I recall, and was a steadfast champion of what we were trying to do, which was to generate a proper dialogue between the different parties on the island of Ireland about the future of Ireland and about how to build a peace for our country, for our island, and indeed for relations between our two neighbouring islands. And many of you will know that I'm a great enthusiast for the work of W.B. Yeats. But one of the lines from Yeats that I always think of when I think of the Northern Ireland peace process, and Seamus Mallon and others who contributed to it over years and decades, is a line that Yeats mentioned in a different context. He was talking about sort of personal things rather than political ones. But he said, in the late God of Inish Free, for peace comes dropping slow. And that's certainly been the experience of people in Ireland, people in Northern Ireland. And Seamus Mallon is of a generation. He happened to be born at a time when he was reaching his 30s as a teacher in County Armagh. The Troubles came upon him. Seamus didn't create the Troubles, but his generation were obliged to take up the baton and deal with those troubles and find a way through them. And peace did come dropping slow in Northern Ireland, and it depended on a generation and more of effort to try and move things from where they were when the Troubles first erupted in the late 60s to where they were on that fateful day in April 1998 when the Good Friday Agreement was signed. And I was there that day, and so was Seamus Mallon. So I've seen Seamus's contribution. I've seen how, when things look bad, it required people of courage and steadfastness to say, no, we must keep on, we must persist in our efforts to bring peace to our island. We look back now over the 20 years almost that's passed since the Good Friday Agreement was signed, and all the progress that's been made, and the important role, the vital role that Seamus played as the first Deputy First Minister in the Northern Ireland Executive. And then we look at today, where again Northern Ireland is challenged by a breakdown between the two main parties in government. However, my view and the view of the government I represent is that the only option for Northern Ireland is to go back after this election to try and minimise the damage that will be done during what's likely to be a fairly vigorous campaign, because at the end of the day the parties have to go back and sort things out for themselves, sort things out within the framework of the Good Friday Agreement, because that's the only way forward for the people of Ireland, North and South, and indeed for relations between our two countries. And finally, may I say that Brexit for Ireland is a great setback, because it poses challenges for our country in all sorts of areas: economic challenges, challenges to do with North-South relations in Ireland, challenges to do with our relations with our nearest neighbour here in Britain. We will meet those challenges head on, I'm convinced of that, and we will not succumb to the challenges. But Brexit was something that we didn't invent. It's been inflicted upon us. I know we weren't the main object of those who voted for Brexit, but nonetheless, it is certainly true that the Irish dimension was never given the kind of priority I think it ought to have deserved. And now, of course, we have to deal with the consequences of that vote and Britain's imminent departure from the European Union for Ireland, North and South, and for British-Irish relations. But we have to deal with reality, we have to deal with things as they are and not as we might like them to be, and therefore we must move forward. But tonight we have the privilege of having a legend of the Northern Ireland peace process and a legend of the broadcasting world in John Snow. But I now hand over to Ivan Gibbons, who's going to act as master of ceremonies and put some order on events. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Margaret.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ivan Gibbons. Like Mary, I'm a member of the board of Hammersmith Irish Cultural Centre, one of the trustees. I'm also a university lecturer, and I'd like to briefly tell you how tonight's event came about. Before I do that, I know Mary didn't want to name names, but I do know that in order that this building is open here on a Friday evening, Mary, Colette Mackin, General Manager, Katie Walsh, her deputy, volunteers, workers, musicians have been working their socks off to actually get the place up and running for this evening's event. And I fully appreciate the hard work that they put into it, and they've really done us proud this evening. Now, some of you were at our first conference, first annual conference this time last year, Troubles, Tragedy and Trauma, an extremely successful conference highlighting the ongoing legacy of violence in Northern Ireland. And we're pleased to be hosting its second follow-up conference tonight on the anniversary of the first. Now, both events were conceived by one of my MA Irish Studies students, who is here tonight with his family, Michael O'Hare. Michael is from South Armagh himself and has personal experience of the impact of violence in Northern Ireland. In 1976, his 12-year-old sister, Magella, was shot dead by the British Army. As part of their MA studies, all my students had to do research and write a dissertation. In consultation with myself and my colleagues, Michael asked, was it feasible to actually write his dissertation on his fellow South Armagh man, Seamus Mallon. And in the course of a number of meetings and interviews over last summer, Michael interviewed Seamus, and the end result is a piece of work which has earned Michael an MA in Irish Studies with merit, as well as tonight's event. He will be, he's a very shy person, but he will be coming out at the end of today's session to say a few words. Now, Seamus Mallon, as you probably know, was SDLP MP for Newry and Armagh from 1986 to 2005. He was Deputy Leader of the SDLP from 1979 to 2001 and Deputy First Minister in the Northern Ireland Executive from 1998 to 2001. He is a controversial and plain-speaking politician. I think it's fair enough to say that, as exemplified by his statement that the political negotiations which led to the Good Friday Agreement in 1998 would result in, quote, Sunningdale for slow learners, end quote, a reference to the failed power-sharing experiment in the 1970s. Discussing his career with him tonight is journalist and television presenter John Snow, best known as the presenter of Channel 4 News since 1979. Welcome, Seamus and John, to the new Hammersmith Irish Cultural Centre. Just to say, we will have a short break at approximately 8:30 or so for about 20 minutes. So without further ado, it's over to you, John and Seamus.
Seamus, I better just explain my locus. I'm not Irish, as we pointed out earlier, but as a cub reporter, I was sent to Northern Ireland in 1973. What happened was that actually UTV shut their newsroom on weekends. So whatever happened in Northern Ireland didn't get covered by UTV. Occasionally people would come up to me on the streets and say, "Whose news is yours?" And I would say, ITN. UTV? No. Well, anyway, that was the way it was. Amazingly, it's an amazing thing to think that for a society that was suffering so much, that there was a complete closure of coverage on weekends. So that's how I came to be there really very, very regularly throughout the 1970s and right up. Well, I was there for the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, but I'm not an expert of any sort. But what I do know is that we're sitting in the presence of a hero, of somebody who transcends absolutely everything that has happened in Northern Ireland and is an absolutely integral part of it. And it's a great privilege to talk to you tonight. Seamus, how old were you, do you think, when you first woke up to the idea that there might be anything wrong in Northern Ireland?
I suppose inherently one recognised that somehow or another our family was different. Many times on weekends, myself and my sisters could hear bands coming up the street, and indeed, very close to where we lived, the drumming match would start. We were, of course, as children, beguiled, looking out the windows, music, noise, people. But somehow or another, the drums didn't signify enjoyment. They were a threat. A threat to what? A threat to the people who felt that by portraying themselves in the way they did, that somehow or another they were defending their position. No surrender. A lot of people, certainly where I live, came with the Atchison family when plantation took place and are direct descendants of those who were soldiers, retainers, farm people. And there's a complex thing there, because they were endowed by a high church monarchy and yet they were the essence of non-conformism. And close to Armagh, which is the ecclesiastical centre of Armagh, you had this almost complex relationship between those people and what they would have seen as the church authorities. Now, I make that point for two reasons. The first thing they did when the plantation took place in what is now Gosford Park, people lost land. People had to build a wall 1 mile square with stone taken by horse and cart from the quarry in Gorawood, which is 15 miles away. First thing they did, and this is where I started, they created 5 forts. That's a euphemism for lookout posts. And 400 years later, lo and behold, you had the authorities building lookout posts along the border. And almost by implication, a Prime Minister here who is toying with the ideas of having lookout posts again on the border. Maybe not manned by police, but by customs people. Oh, I can tell you, and people here from the county I live in, customs men are not very popular. Not just because a lot of people in paramilitary groups have made millions and billions out of it since. But I remember my mother going for sugar to Dundalk, and her disguising the sugar in some part of her clothing. And an uncle of mine, I had to get him 4 packets of cigarettes. That was smuggling. But the essence of what I'm trying to say is, there's no such things as what I'm going to talk about. When you talk about Northern Ireland, you have to almost really get a new vocabulary. Right? So-and-so's a unionist. I know unionists. I know Protestants who aren't unionists. But what do we call them? What am I? I regard myself as a Republican. A term which is debased and used and abused by all sections of the IRA, and still is, by the way. So that we have to look at the words, and to come up nearer to the time that we're in. I just make this point. There's a misnomer there that somehow or another we have to get rid of. It's called the peace process. Those who are claiming, and do so on a weekly and daily basis, that their loyalty and their support for the peace process means that, in effect, everything to do in that area is their invention. It's the people who are killing neighbours, friends in the unionist community because they put a label on them. That's one term that I think we've got to look at. The other is...
Seamus, let me just interrupt you, because I mean, you're taking us very neatly and very quickly into the very present issues. But I want to just find out a little bit about why you are the way you are. And you see, given what you said about growing up in South Armagh, I wondered why you didn't become radicalised to the point of becoming one of those Republicans that you decried just now.
Yeah. Both my father's family and my mother's family were very much involved in 1922 and previous to it. They had a remarkable reaction to that. My father never mentioned it, nor could I ever get him to talk about it. My mother did, and did so in very disparaging terms about the use of violence and the use and abuse of those who were inflicting violence on others. It was easy in those days to become, and let's face it, I was a young man, I enjoyed myself. Eugene knows that. And was doing all right, earning a few shillings, doing One day a guy came to the school where I was teaching, a small school. He lived in the same village as myself, in what was, you could only describe as a hovel, no running water, no electric light, and a very large family. At that time, believe it or not, the local councillors allocated houses. And the local councillor, of course, made his position clear. He said, no Catholic pig or its litter will get a house in Market Hill as long as I'm here. Right? So I said, look, Harry, come back to me in a couple of days. Couldn't get it out of my mind, decided you have to do something. So I went to 3 people. One of them was a member of the Royal Black Preceptory, whose son later became the senior civil servant in Northern Ireland, and who ran a pub in a totally loyalist village. I said, Tommy, can we do something about this? Is this the kind of place you want to live in? And he came with us. I went to Jim Nelson, who was a local doctor. I think he played rugby for Ireland at one time, the front row. And he said, yeah. And a Catholic curate, Charlie Devlin. And we went down to see our MP. Now, this was an experience. This was Sir Norman Strong, who was the Speaker of the Unionist Parliament. And I deliberately used that term. And he as much as laughed at us, looked out the window, wrote a few things, and told us our time was up. Now, it had been a very easy going home that day to say, right, if that's the way you want to play it. But I didn't. I didn't for this reason. As I say, I live in a very unionist village. But those are my people. Whether I like it or not, they are my people. They're the people who always came to my father to get forms signed or to get references to join the army because it was the only way they were ever going to get work. And God knows how many other ways that he helped. So that has stuck with me since. And I think we need to redefine things. I think it was Spinoza, now correct me if I'm wrong, who said that peace wasn't an absence of war, but it was an attitude of mind, a disposition toward benevolence, confidence, and justice. We have had no violence for a considerable number of years. Have we had justice? Have we had confidence? Not at all. Have we had that attitude of mind, which is required for people to live together? We see no evidence of it. And unfortunately, what has happened now through the political process is that you have the two big sets of bullies, got the big sets of votes, and have spent this past 12 years lining the pockets of those who elected them. Those are harsh words, but they're a fact. You had a balkanized situation there, and the present impasse is a fair indication of it, but don't forget this. The same two groupings, this isn't the first time they brought down an executive. They, jointly, the IRA by their violence, and the Unionists by their paramilitary violence in the streets, and what was described by a very senior colleague of Dan's at that time as a betrayal of the people of Northern Ireland, but by the then Prime Minister Harold Wilson and Merlin Rees, who wrung his hands and did nothing. That Sunningdale Agreement was brought down by the same people who brought down the present one. They did it, of course, John, from inside. And
Sure.
here is the difficulty.
Well, I'm still wanting to explore you in the context of how you've come to the beliefs that you have and the understanding of the situation you had, and indeed the role you played in the peace process. Sorry to use that phrase. And what is interesting is that I think I've worked out your parents and their attitude to what happened in 1922 were an absolutely formative influence in terms of the way you saw the world you were growing up in. Then you played Gaelic football and were rather good. You were you played for County Armagh, and then you became a teacher. This was a rather normal life in a very abnormal situation. But it seems to me you had the strength of background and influence that rendered you capable of working your way inside the society and at the same time striving to resolve its differences. And that is, in the end, why the SDLP, why there could not have been peace without the SDLP and without your formidable character. Because you were dealing with people who had answered this crisis in a very different way.
Thank you very much for those
But it's true.
kind words. It is. Let me give you one example, a very basic one. Near to where I live, there's an Easter march, naturally enough, at Easter. I happened to call into a neighbouring pub, and someone who would have liked very much to embarrass me waited until it was fairly full and said, "Jimmy, are you going to the march on Sunday?" I said, "Where to?" "To the Republican plot in the Catholic graveyard." I said, "Tell me this, Tommy, who's in it?" "What?" "Who's in the Republican plot that you're going to march to?" Turned out there was nobody in it. And I knew that, right? But there's a mirror image of the bands coming up to the street in which I lived. And something that has puzzled me, and still does. Unionist people are very undemonstrative, unemotional, hard-headed, nothing, everything's tidy. The lovely line of Seamus Mallon's poems about the white walls with tracts upon them. Right. How do those people feel the need to march up and down the streets almost every weekend with garish gloves on them and sashes in a form of exhibitionism that I think is totally out of character for the people? I haven't worked that out. Just the same as I haven't really worked out how people were going to march to graves. But it no inhabitants.
It seems to me that you are really saying nothing has changed in terms of the tribal differences, and yet, you know, we looking in from the outside, I mean, somebody like me on the mainland here, and I don't go so often now, but we read of and hear of things happening like education in some schools becoming mixed. You read of a degree of reaching out in the community, but the same old politics at the top and at the bottom.
Not quite accurate. For this reason, there are changes taking place. I have never, as I say, I live in a very unionist area. The latest scandal of £700 million with this fee, it's about boilers and giving people money for burning wood that's imported from Louisiana in cases. That's a fact. In the interests of climate change. That has been deliberately brought up with me by so many unionists in recent weeks. Almost everybody that I met, they regard that as an affront. They regard that as something alien to their whole personalities and their beliefs. You mentioned the term education. One of the things that's a problem is that history was never taught in Northern Ireland. History has not been taught, even now. The interesting thing with many people, all sides of the community, another cliche, when you tell them about the first immigrants from Ireland, were the non-conformist Presbyterians who had to leave because of a tithe that was put on their land and income. They went off to America. They're now grown people, intelligent people. No, I don't think that's true. But it is. They went on then, strangely enough, to kick the British out of America and to lead the battles. General McClellan and so many presidents, and I'm sorry for using that term at the moment, but there's a problem. That problem is the same in terms of, and here I go into the trap, Catholic schools. It always reminds me of a headline in the Irish News once. There was Celtic Park in Belfast and Dunmore. Catholic dog wins at Dunmore. That's the headline on the front page. Yeah. So I still talk to people who still believe the old lie. Dulce et decorum est, pro patria mora. The poetry of Wilfred Owen, which just by the by got me into real trouble with the guy whom I had to go. He became a Unionist MP, the rivers of blood.
You know.
He was sitting behind me and I was making a speech. I referred to Wilfred Owen's poetry. And he was thumping at the back of the chair, at the back of the bench, and grumbling out loud. So I finished anyhow and I turned around and said, what the hell was that about? If you must quote my friend, he said, quote him accurately. I said, come on, we go to the library. It's only a few steps away. And we asked for the authorised version. It was an interesting hour because he sat and he told me that his biggest regret was he didn't die in that war. That his friends all died, but he didn't. I was present at the car park in Ramore at the Count, where he was beaten. My colleague Eddie McGrady won the seat. I wasn't allowed in. We were the roughs from South Armagh. Had to keep us out in the yard. But I'll never forget the sight. He came out. The lowering sun caught himself and his wife on the steps. Not a single Unionist came out with him. Went over and shook hands with him and wished him well. And he put on the hat and off he went. I had a liking for the man in a strange way. That somehow or another, this arch bigot, in some ways, was a remarkable person in himself. That is that point. But, John, I go back to this.
But I mean, the one thing which I'm also beginning to get is your feeling that it won't change. And that's a very, very gloomy outlook. I mean, you said you'd like to see the power sharing go on again and have the same, and yet you actually told us the other day in a very interesting interview with the Irish Times that actually the Deputy First Minister has, since your day to this very day, never been given equality of esteem.
That's quite true.
So you don't think it'll change?
Well, that will change.
No, but I mean, the whole, this terrible kind of intransigence between the two forces.
The words that I least like to hear. It's up to the parties in the north to settle this. It's not, we don't have sovereignty. If we had sovereignty, we wouldn't be in the fix we are with Brexit. Right? And let's take that a step further. The place was set up, Northern Ireland, as a contrivance to get a unionist majority for a supremacist government, which lasted 80 years. It was a contrivance, and it fell. Sunningdale was set up a very imaginative approach. It was a contrivance, and it fell. The Good Friday Agreement was a very, very intelligent contrivance, maybe a wee bit too much, and it fell. Question now is, what contrivance can be pulled out of any hat to deal with this matter? And that is where I think Dan's right, in that there isn't another one. There just isn't one. And if they are not going to resuscitate this, then it's direct rule ad infinitum. Now, you mentioned, is it changing? I'd like to quote a little quotation from a poem by John Hewitt, who was a very honest unionist, a member of the unionist community. He advised us all to make amends by small, friendly gestures, hoping by patient words I may convince my people and this people that we are changed, if not to kin, to cohabitants, as goat and ox may graze in the same field, and each gain something from proximity. That is a remarkable, depressed piece of writing.
I think it's a very good one to pause on, because the next questions are going to come from the floor after we've had a 20-minute break. But I'm going to end with one little story for you, because it happened in Armagh. Your great friend, Ian Paisley, right? He was locked up for a week in Armagh jail. And he was going to come out at 7 o'clock in the morning. And we got there, and as you know, there's a sort of hill running down to the gates. Do you remember? So we positioned the camera at the top of the hill, and suddenly the doors open, and the big man comes out, and he sees us at the top of the hill, and he shouts, no, he comes out of the door, and the first thing that happens is he starts, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed. Are you rolling, boys?
I was in the same cell. I had committed a terrible crime. I was elected to an assembly, the prior assembly, while at the same time I was a member of Shannon. And a case was taken in court by Harold McCusker, who was a unionist MP. And my friend, an eminent lawyer, told me, look, you say nothing. Not a thing. So this eminent barrister from Dublin had given an opinion to Harold McCusker, which was read, and at which stage I just couldn't help it. Lord Justice O'Donnell, Turlough, was the judge. Right? I was in the same school as Turlough. After him, I think. Anyhow, have you anything to say? And I said, yes, my lord. God, I thought it was Robert Emmet for a minute or two. I said, if you continue, I would have to put you in contempt of court. I said, I will continue. Take him down. So, this young policeman with whom I fished. We used to go fishing in the evening. Come on, Sonny, go on. You go down to the cell, took his hat off. What do you want in your coffee? Was the question. I said, whiskey. With a straight face. He said, you know, Paisley was in this cell. He didn't get any whiskey, I said. No. About an hour later, word was sent down that I had purged my contempt and I could now leave. And I was almost straightening my tie in anticipation of a rapturous applause outside. There was one little woman with 2 bags going past. I'll not tell you what she said to me, but you know, she was absolutely true. It was chastening. I don't want to put myself into the penal career of Paisley. You know, it's interesting just to throw it out at the minute. Paisley did more time in jail than Martin McGuinness.
That's interesting. But I think we'll pause it there. When we come back from whatever we're going to do in the next 20 minutes, and it could be anything from going to the loo to having a drink. I'm not sure about that. Is there other drinks available? There are indeed. And we'll be back here at 10 to 9, and we'll resume with your questions.
Okay, we're going to make a start again now. Can I have your attention, please? Bit of order, please. Order. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right. Just to let you know what's happening, we're going to have a brief few words from Conor McGinn, the MP for St Helens North. Conor himself is from South Armagh, but he's here in his role as chair of the all-party parliamentary group on the Irish in Britain. Following Conor's few words, we're going to go back to John and Seamus. We're going to go on to a question and answer session. John tells me he has to be away by 9:45, so we better get cracking. Thanks very much. Conor.
Thanks, Ivan. It's great to be here on such a special occasion, and on behalf of my colleagues from Parliament, Lord Dubs, Alf Dubs, who's a great friend of Ireland and the Irish in Britain, and Andy Slaughter, the local MP here, who's been such a strong supporter of the community, not just in West London, but right across London and across Britain. It's a real honour to have you, Seamus. I feel slightly intimidated as an MP from Newry and Armagh, but unlike Seamus, not the MP for Newry and Armagh, or as was. Do you know what I'm really glad about? I'm glad that I have the chance to say publicly in front of you what I have said privately to many people, but not to Seamus, but to Seamus, in front of Seamus and to you. Seamus is such a colossal figure, and he has had an incredible influence on me, and I only have recently come to realise just how much. My great-uncle Freddie McGinn was a strong supporter of Seamus's. My uncle Stephen was an SDLP councillor, and when Seamus Mallon came to Bestbrook, it was a big event. My grandmother and grandfather on my mother's side described their politics as Mallon, and my grandmother, who passed away this year, one of my earliest memories of her, and like lots of Irish families, we spent a lot of time with our grandparents, was before an election, and I must have been it might have even been the 92 parliamentary election, I must have been only 8 or 9, and the SDLP came into the park to canvass, and we were out playing football in the street, and I ran into the house, and I said to my granny, Uncle Stephen's in the park, and the SDLP are canvassing, and she went and looked out the window of the front room, and she said, "Oh, Jesus Christ, here's Seamus Mallon coming to the door and the hair standing on me." and it was an indication of the respect and the respect and esteem that Seamus was and is held in. And I think what we've seen in the first half tonight, and in some of the recent interviews he's given, that Seamus still has a first-class mind and analysis of politics on the island of Ireland, in Britain, and indeed in Europe, and with what's happening in the world. And we're very lucky, and I think we're very privileged to have him, because sometimes when we know people, or when they're from the same part of the world as us, and it's great to see Eugene Reevy here tonight, Michael O'Hare, I know other friends from Armagh, and of course Colette Mackin from the centres from Armagh as well, so we have a little bit of a hegemony and a monopoly on tonight. But you don't understand the greatness of people that you're in contact with. Seamus Mallon is a statesman. He is revered and respected across the House of Commons. I feel bereft and sad that I never got to have the chance to have you as my pupil master in the House, Seamus, as a member. But I want to finish by saying that if I am a fraction of the public servant, the wise counsellor, the follower and disciple of peace and reconciliation, if I am a fraction of all of those things in the way that you have been, Seamus, I hope my constituents are as proud of me as people in Newry and Armagh and Irish people in this country are of you. Thank you, Seamus.
Right, Seamus, let's lower the tone a bit. Let's hear it then. People are always intrigued by your relationship with John Hume. It seems to be both love and despair.
Somewhere in between. We worked together for 30 years. I read in the papers almost every week, in a snippet somewhere, that we were falling out, this, that, and the other. The remarkable thing about it was I have a huge respect for John, for his intellect, for his political skills, for his ability to figure out who's worth knowing and who isn't. I also liked him very much, and still do. He exasperates me at times.
Give me an example.
Well, I could specify a number of times that John, Joe Hendren, Eddie McGrady and myself were in the House of Commons together. John and Joe just did not gel. And Joe and I and Eddie were staying in the Kensington Tara Hotel. We had had a couple of rounds of something good, and in came John. Have you no work to do, you fellas? Said nothing. I knew Joe was going to lose his temper. I thought I'd got myself in the right position for avoiding it. He threw a punch anyhow. We didn't catch John, he caught me. The other exasperating thing, and the MPs will know this, Eddie and I used to always meet for lunch on a Wednesday. It was Prime Minister's question, Northern Ireland questions. And we would agree with each other what question we would go on to try to get in. And naturally enough, you give it a little bit of thought beforehand. And then we were sitting in the prayers were over. We were sitting on the benches. The speaker was in. And then comes John. And up he gets on either Eddie's or mine. My question. That was us out. And we reminded him of it. But these things happen. Worse is happening in the Labour Party. But let me put it this way. There are two people I couldn't dream of going on holidays with. One of them's David Trimble. And the other is John Hume. And I was deputy to both. What a better wonder I am the way I am.
The lovely thing in the interview you gave to the Irish Times was it was the picture of you when you were working with Trimble, when you were, the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, and he would walk at an enormous pace in order not to be seen coming down the corridor next to you.
That's right.
And for the life of me, I don't know why you didn't go into training so that you could get up a bit of speed and just embarrass him. What was it that made him quite so narky?
I don't know. I think he had so many chips on his shoulder.
Oh. It was no better being a hack trying to interview him either.
No, but the secret, of course, if you're ever interviewing him again, get him onto some arcane legal point and let him go. It was always great in the House of Commons because he was always going to light on some legal point and ask him for clarification and then come again and get somebody else to come. Speech was over. And said, no, I'd remark that he was a very good parliamentarian, except for getting hung up on those hooks. An excellent parliamentarian. John didn't like parliaments. He didn't like anywhere but Strasbourg. That was where he was really at home.
But talking of holidays, if you were to go on holiday with Tony Blair, you could have stayed with the Putins, the Berlusconis, or the Mubaraks, and it wouldn't have cost you a penny. How did you get on with Tony Blair?
It would have been worse if I were staying with Mandelson. I was the original devotee of Blair's.
Weren't we all?
Yeah, I knew him when he was Shadow Home Secretary. I had gone to see him on some issues pertaining to Northern Ireland. I saw him in the House of Commons, he was brilliant. I saw him on television, he was absolutely superb. And somehow he lost it. And I think the reason he lost it, and I think maybe it's one of the reasons that Brexit is coming, is that he lost his people. He lost people, ordinary people, Labour voters, Labour people, to Mandelson and Blair. And I think that resulted actually in the awful debate on Iraq. It was, remember, the Dr. David
Kelly, death of David Kelly.
Who died. Now, I met that man once at a select committee that he was in for. I remember sitting, and I could take you to the exact spot I was sitting, when he made a speech. And I turned round to the person who was next to me, very good friend of mine. I said, "You're not voting for this, are you?" He says, "I haven't my mind made up." So I finished me with him. He had this knack of, in a very persuasive way, of having a moral position on everything, which he never pursued. Think of the number of times he publicly declared himself morally bound by this or that, and proceeded to act away from it. And one bit of advice to anybody who's ever in politics: the process is important, yes, very. But the morality and the principle of something supersedes it. And there is the choice, I think, that's facing people in England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and the Republic of Ireland. It's one of those things that come. And I just finished with this, the way in which the public of Ireland have been put into a terrible position, having gone into the collapse, bankruptcy almost, and to get itself back again, get things moving again, to get things developing in the way they're developing, and then to be gobsmacked with this. You see, it's another of the contradictions of where I live. The people who voted Brexit were by and large the farming community, the big farms. Right? 87% of the farm incomes in Northern Ireland came from the EU. Right? Where are we going to go now? Who's going to volunteer to go over and ask the Treasury for the 87% that they have lost to Europe? The European Parliament and Commission supported in a very substantial way the type of programmes along the border, north and south, which were helping to move towards reconciliation. They'll be gone. Can you see a Tory government reinstating those? And just a last point on it. What is going to be the position? Say you have a farm along the border and you have 12 cows in that field and 12 in this field. And you're taking that 12 to sell them at a certain price and this 12 for a different price, and the price is loaded by the input from EU. But these poor 12 don't get any. That's gone. No, that's kamikaze stuff from the unionist community. Because in reality, if any section of the community needs the EU, it is Northern Ireland for this reason. For this reason. The monastic role that the Irish monks and sisters played in Europe, way back, the University of Louvain, or Leuven as they now call it, Irish College in France, in Rome, the remarkable impact that small island had in the whole continent of Europe, and we've been cut off from it. Cut off from it. Mention was made of the cultural dimension to our lives. In terms of the cultural dimension of our lives, John Montague, I think, got it very, very, I don't have the exact quotation, but he talked about not being of that and not being of that. I tried to simplify it by calling it a semi-detached position. Nobody really wants us. Some say they do, but can they afford us? Some say, we don't want you, but we're holding on to you because you're an embarrassment to us every 5 years. See, there's, how do you get a cultural dimension into that type of psyche? And this is why I keep harping on about something that we have. Could I read this little poem? And I'll ask you who wrote it. And it says, all good people agree, and all good people say, all nice people like us are we, and everyone else is they. But if you cross the sea instead of over the way, you may end by looking on we as only a sort of they. Rudyard Kipling, believe it or not.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Where do you get all these things? You collect them?
No, I read quite a bit, and if I see anything that sets my fancy, I write it down. Yeah. And then most of the time I can find where to put it. Other times I can't.
Unlike you, Seamus, I'm an incurable optimist. I see the common agricultural subsidies as a possible route to Irish unity. I mean, the only place they could ever go and ask for it is actually the Dáil.
Yeah.
Not Westminster, because if they could negotiate, they could possibly hold this amazing carrot, saying, you know, I can get all of this for you if you think again about Brexit. But actually, I'll tell you something else, because I am actually quite wacky, and this is not to be tweeted, not to be Facebook. There's a secret between you and me. Yeah. I don't think they'll manage it. I just do not think it can be done. And by the time they think they're about to do it and things have fallen apart, there'll be another general election. And although there is at the moment a mild shambles, but the truth is there is in fact a considerable shambles in both parties. It's just that it's more evident in the Labour Party, but it's all there in the Conservative Party too. And I think this is going to be very, very sticky. And that, in fact, in about, say, 16, 18 months, they'll be beginning to pay the price, and it will be beginning to be painful. And might be very painful in Northern Ireland.
I think it will.
Anyway, that's not for quotation. I am as mad as a hatter, but I just can't believe that it can be done.
The central point that you make is an absolutely interesting one.
Steady. That's a very praising sort of word to use. Interesting.
I have this remarkable fantasy, and I've had it for some time, that the unionists will catch themselves on. And they'll recognise that the British government has been using them.
Yeah.
Giving them uniforms, making them jailers, and then, when it comes to the crunch, toss them aside, as they did, in such a way that never, and no became new words in the political dictionary. My fantasy is this, that sooner or later dawn on them, and they'll get into their cars and they'll go down to Dublin, to Leinster House, to Dáil Éireann, and they'll meet with the leaders of all the political parties there. And they'll say, right, we want to leave Britain. I've seen through them. We want to know what you'll do first when they go. And, of course, the platitudes would roll. And then they would ask, well, what about a cut of that power-sharing thing that they have in the north? That'd be the balance of power. Get up the road, lads. You have a fine big building up there. Stay up there. You're not getting any balance of power here. And right. That's fantasy world. But you know it's very true to what you say.
Now let's get some questions from you. And I will try to find you in the gallery if you do ask a question. You've got lights on. That's nice. Who would like to ask a question? Yes. Wait a second, a mic will come to you. Just. I hope this is not being recorded and taken down and used in evidence against.
Actually, it was lovely to hear you chat here in London tonight. Just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how you actually got into politics.
How? As I say, as part of the civil rights movement, that led to an election in 1973 to district councils, the first under the new McCrory system. We had selected a candidate, and I came home from school, it was about 4 o'clock. My wife Gertrude said, oh, by the way, that guy who was to run was pulled out. Nominations closed at 5. I tried some other people on the phone, no. And I wasn't going to let it go. I borrowed the deposit from a very staunch unionist shopkeeper. And on the way back, I went in and told him what I had done with it. I, by some form of magic, had 8 good people and true people nominating me. I'll not go any further with that. And I was elected. Then I was on the treadmill. And in the circumstances we were, there was no getting off it. I'd had it by then. So.
No, we're just savouring it.
Oh, yeah.
Right, next question here.
Hi, Seamus. I'm from Portadown. I'm from Portadown, and going back what you were saying earlier about parades and whatnot, and you know the history of Portadown and what it's like. Do you still think that the attitudes of people have changed any over the years? Not everyone took the gun or planted a bomb, but people's attitudes towards one another were never good. Do you think that's changed at all over this last 30 years?
Keep the microphone, because I'm going to ask you.
I'll go back to the Hewitt thing. Proximity. What it might do was goat to ox. Of course, there'd be a row, but who's the goat and who's the ox? But I know exactly what you're talking about. Portadown.
A horrible place.
Yeah, but they're good people.
Oh yeah.
Some very good people, right? But there's no community involvement. There's no meeting of people. And as long as you have that type of division in housing and other things, then you're going to have a need for proximity. And the only way that I think that can be addressed is, number one, by increasing the housing stock substantially, and number two, to take every opportunity of trying to get people living together. Now, that's all platitudinous stuff. I accept that. You see, there are more good people living in the north of Ireland than there are those who aren't so good. That's a fact. That's something to work on. That's something to be...
And I'd say that's been true throughout.
I said that there's no doubt. There's no doubt. And the fears of people in Portadown. I was in office at the time of the second Drumcree, at the time of the Oma bomb, at the time of the murder of the burning to death of the 3 young boys in Ballymoney. And it was harrowing, absolutely harrowing. Now, we have got to realise that there's no magic wand here in this. That, in effect, is going to take time. Time for people to get over it. Time for people to express their sadness. Let me say a couple of things about it. Truth and justice. Can anybody imagine the British government presenting details of their use of paramilitaries to kill people, as in Pat Finucane, right?
Even this week, you know, because of Trump and waterboarding, we brought it up.
That's right.
They ran a mile.
Yeah, indeed. And people in my community where I live, who would think like me. I'm trying to get a way of describing me. Because I'm not a nationalist, I'm a Republican. And I'm not, well, I am a Catholic, yeah. But the God I try to talk to doesn't hear me much. However, I'm not the only one. We don't realise how the hurt that there is in a decent Protestant community as a result of the violence carried out against their fathers, sons, uncles, aunts, and children. Nor can we imagine the hurt to Eugene Reevy, 3 brothers shot dead in their homes. Michael O'Hare, so his sister Nigella, going to school, shot. And multiply that by 4,500. That's what this term reconciliation means. First of all, we have got to reconcile with ourselves. Secondly, we've got to reconcile with the people we might see as their enemies. And I think above all, we have got to show that we are aware. There's a little thing, John, here's another one.
God, what would you like if you had an iPhone? We'd be all getting it in our...
I saw it in the book. It's plagiarism, but I'm going to use it. By all means, preach the gospel of peace at all times. And if you have to, use words.
Nice. Very nice.
That tells me something.
Whose was that? Did you want to say anything, darling?
What I will say is, maybe after 50 years, and the generation that's coming up now, my nephews and nieces, people like that, don't know what it was like for us growing up. They are growing up in a different atmosphere.
Yeah.
We grew up with, we didn't have social politics. We had Catholic politics, we had Protestant politics, we had no social politics. So they are now getting used to that. And hopefully the next generation, this will all be something else they'll look back and they'll be learning in school of history, something that happened years and years ago. Hopefully.
The seeds are sown. Just before we come to you, I'd like to come to the microphone upstairs because they haven't had a look in. And in the spirit of egalitarianism.
Hello, thank you very much, Seamus. I left Newry, my name is Liz McNulty, and I left Newry in 1969, having had the dubious honour of having been expelled from the 2 Catholic grammar schools. But the longer I've been away from there, the more I'm convinced that, first of all, I was 18 before I met the first Protestant in my life, even though I lived in Newry. And I really feel the longer I am away from it, that until you start to get the 4-year-olds and the 3-year-olds, Protestants and Catholics, in the same classrooms, growing up together, we will never have sustainable peace in Northern Ireland. And I greatly
I mean, it's a wonderful point, and everybody agrees, but I would like to know why you got expelled. I'm sure everyone else would too.
One was, and I'll quote, for raising boys' passions in the Florentine capital. And smoking cannibals.
great. Thank you very much for your contribution. Now, sir, I'm sorry that I... Hold on a sec.
Hello, Seamus. My name's Paul Mallon. I'm originally from Belfast. My dad was murdered in 1972 by the UVF, and years on, I had to deal with the HUT, which was a very painful process. I'm just wondering, in your opinion, in the future, can we ever see a proper investigation of the innocent people that were killed in the Troubles?
I will put my answer this way. I can't see the British government putting all its cards on the table because the amount of collusion that took place was remarkable. I don't see the IRA putting their cards on the table because they would have a lot of ramifications, not least the number who were involved in the IRA as agents for the security forces. I can't see the UDA or the UVF explaining to any forum why they killed their father. I can't see those things. Now, I'm sceptical about the South African experiment with truth, and there's a big difference, and it's a strange one. It's a difference of size. Big country, South Africa. You could read in the paper about what happened 4.5 hours away in another part of the country, in the north of Ireland. We all know everybody. If we don't know everybody, we know their cousins or their in-laws. And the fear spreads, and the venom that follows fear spreads. So my answer to you is not evasive, but I hope to God I'm wrong, but I can't say with any confidence that it will. Eugene and I discussed the same thing earlier today. But let's take this out of it. The power of the human spirit is something remarkable. I spent 40 years going to houses where somebody is killed. I don't know how those people were as Christian, for want of a better word, in the way that they have dealt with it. I just couldn't conceive of circumstances where I could have that type of magnanimity. And there, think of the number of people who are there, and that is in that community, right? The difficulty, and I going back to the Sacred Heart Convent and St. Clair's and all that. You see, the comfort zone is very comforting, right? If you live in Uri, right, or across McLean, just to take a few places, when you go home in the evening, you're in a comfort zone because you're by and large living in a Catholic community, right? I had the experience, and still have, of living outside the comfort zone. I had also had a problem with I was the party's spokesman on policing and justice. When I went to get my papers the next morning, I was liable to meet the wife of a UDR man who was told to a policeman that I had called for steps to be taken about them. That's not comfortable. I remember 3 occasions going to houses with men who were shot dead by the IRA on my doorstep. Right? One of them, a disembodied voice from inside, as the door opened slightly, "Show Mr. Mallon the door, tell him he is not wanted here." And that happened to me 3 times. There's nothing sears your soul like that. And it is one of the things that I will always remember, as well as kneeling under a cattle truck on Mark Day, when someone we all knew, Snowden Corky, who was a policeman, was shot dead. I just happened to be waiting for my daughter coming out of a shop. Ran over. The effluent from the cattle truck falling down on him. And he said, "Seamus, tell him I love him. It was his family." It was the last words he said. Right. Another friend of mine, Denny Mullen, shot on his own doorstep. I heard it on the police radio, which I shouldn't have. Rolled over, his daughter, sitting at the doorstep, 3 years of age in her nightdress. And Denny was lying, dead. Right. She's now a member of our party, councillor. But the way in which those people have all risen from their sorrows has been an example for all of us. Now there's something we can build on. If we could only get all the platitudes out of the road. Oh, I'm not going to avoid the question on integrated education. Oh, 1973, when I was elected to an assembly, I'd made a speech in the assembly. I thought it was a very good one too. The good points about integrated education. I had previously been invited to speak, be the guest speaker at the Catholic Secondary Teachers Conference. 2 days after my speech, I got a letter telling me I was not welcome. That puts it into perspective. In reality, if we don't have the integrated housing, it's going to be impossible to create that type of situation. I'll just finish with this example. Where I live, there's, again, it's like the Catholic dog at Dunmore, a Catholic school and a Protestant school, a maintained school or a controlled school, whichever way you want to put it. So if you're going to have an integrated school, the choice is either go to one, say, all the Protestant children went to the Catholic school, or all the Catholic school went to the Protestant school, or you build a new school and keep the other two going anyhow. There's the logistical problem of it. The more it's done at the secondary level, the more it will permeate down. It's happening. It's happening in many secondary schools and third level schools. And it's working. It also happened in the school I went to. It's a primary school. My father was the head teacher, and I can think of about 20 youngsters. And I again can't put names, titles on them, who weren't of our persuasion, whoever they are. Were there. Nobody was in the slightest bit worried. We were in the Irish school. We encouraged them to come. We treated them as any child would want to be treated. Is it possible? Yes. Is it going to be easy? No. It's going to take one hell of a lot of courage from the Catholic hierarchy and from the vested interests of a lot of secondary schools which are not pursuing it.
Seamus, that is a very positive note on which to end. We've been in some dark places and we've been in some light places, and the lighter place is one of integration, and though the work is hard and long, it's work that you have been doing all your life, and we're very privileged to have been allowed to sit with you tonight and talk with you, and thank you very, very, very much. It's wonderful. The first event in this new hall should have borne witness to what you've had to talk to us about. We're very privileged, and thank you very, very much.
Could I just take the opportunity of thanking everybody who said nice things about me? John, who is such an inspirational figure. I watch him every night. Don't miss it. Alf Dubbs, Lord Dubbs. Alf was the person who introduced me when I had to be introduced in the House of Commons. I canvassed in part of London with Alf. I'm afraid Alfie lost the seat that time. So I shouldn't have gone. The present MP for Hammersmith, very nice man, very able man, very good man. And my friend from Brassbrook, the new MP for Bolton, yeah, and especially Michael O'Hare, there he is, who Eugene Ravey, all who know the pain of violence. The lady from Chady, oh no, not Chady, Clare Lake, by the way. Yeah. It's so magnificent to see this building. You know, it's years since I've heard a discussion means and what it can do in any part of Ireland. It's remarkable that has happened here. Long may it continue. Thank you.
I introduce you to the man without whom this event would not have taken place, Michael O'Hare. Oh.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm absolutely delighted to see a full hall tonight, and this is part 2 of peace and reconciliation projects that we're trying to get together here. And Seamus, in his wisdom, said to me one time, you can walk up and down the streets as long as you like, but you get nowhere unless you get to the seat of power. So we can, by the same token, we could talk about it at home all the time in Ireland. It doesn't mean anything because the people are ill-informed here on the mainland. This is what we're trying to do, to open up the pain and to try and bring reconciliation to all those who are offended. And that's my mission. I have another couple to do. And before I go, I want to thank Seamus particularly for coming. I scourged him for a long time. John, I approached him blindly and he was most gracious and accepted my invitation to come and compare and do his interview tonight. And I asked him, would he do it? He said, Seamus Mallon, yes. He said, I admire the man. And I think you showed that tonight, John. So many thank yous for that, yeah. I know John's rushing off, but I just want to tell you one story about the MA that I achieved under Ivan's guidance. And it was quite humorous at the start because I had to prepare a bit of work for Ivan to have a look at to see if it was worthy. And he came back to me and he said, Michael, he said, do you have all the attributes of one, he said, someone who hasn't studied for a long time. 2, someone who may not have studied at all. So I said, Ivan, you're right on both counts. So we worked at it and we got it there, and I'm very grateful to Ivan. Thank you, Ivan. And just on another little funny one, I asked Connor to write me a reference so I could get on the course. And it was so glowing that I thought he was writing about someone else, to be honest with you. So thank you, Connor, for that. And that's it from me. Thank you to everyone who participated tonight, and God bless Jerry and Duncan on sound, and the bar staff, and everyone involved here in running this great event tonight. Thank you. God bless you. Lovely to see Jen and Martin in. Everybody, God bless you all. See you next time.